April 6th.
April 6th. April 6th will be the meeting. Usually we start at 6:30 at the special meeting beforehand, and then the regular meeting starts at 7:30. It'll be brought up then. And it's probably a good idea to come in case the council has some questions. It's good for you to fill them in. Okay. No other old business on here. We do have some new business. Item number 1 is discussion about DesRosier Drive Development. This is an item that was brought before the council at the last meeting, but then it was put down to the planning commission, so we can kind of take a look at it and see what to do at this point, what kind of recommendation we can give. Greg, can you kind of fill us in?
Yeah, I'll fill you in. At the last council meeting, we had a public hearing on the sewer water extension for DesRosier Drive. Tonight, what we're talking about is actually which is highlighted in red there, that's the public hearing we had for the sewer utilities. Tonight, we're going to discuss the development of the roach property on the south there. And we've talked about a couple times on at the council level about DesRosier Drive, but never really addressed it yet here at the planning commission level. So tonight we want to just kind of start that discussion out. We don't have all the information in terms of what the development would entail. We do have some information which I'll share with you here shortly, but we don't have all the information. We have a recommendation from staff's perspective as far as like the drainage and stuff like that, so that's still forthcoming. But since we talked about it a couple times at the council level, we wanted to bring it here so that everybody's up to speed on it. This is a draft layout of what the applicant is proposing to build out at that development. Roughly, it's 8.8 acres over there. It's currently zoned R1C, which is country homes. That would require 16,000 square foot per lot for that building. They're proposing to have 8 fourplexes out in that area, which would require a public hearing to have that heard by the planning commission. We're not having a public hearing necessarily tonight, but we wanted to at least start the discussion again so that you guys are aware of it. Again, this is preliminary. We haven't seen anything final from them, but I wanted to share with you what we were seeing. And this is basically an elevation view of what they're proposing in terms of buildings to be built out there. You'll see the fourplexes. You've got the garages on the outside as well as the inside, and then the units in between there. We do have the applicant here. Mr. Roach is here if you want any questions or want to hear from him what he's thinking. But I just wanted to put it out there and get some discussion generated from the planning commission before we went to court.
Refresh my memory, it's zone R1 country homes, so those are larger lots.
Those are larger lots. R1 in city limits is 11,000 square feet. R1C is 16,000 square feet. As far as the type of buildings and everything, that's still the same, it's just the larger lot size in the country homes.
Now these would be rental properties or?
Yes.
Okay. So this would require the city doing sewer water for this project too, correct?
The applicant has petitioned for sewer and water. We did have that public hearing on Monday night. We did not make any decision at that meeting on Monday whether or not we're going to move forward with that. Frank, correct me if I'm speaking out of turn here. It was my sense that the council wanted to hear from the planning commission what their sense was on the development before they decided to spend money on the DesRosier Drive utility extension.
I think that's pretty much what they're saying, yeah.
So how many 16,000 square foot lots could they respectively get in there?
Anywhere between 14 and 17. I mean, we haven't done a detailed analysis of how you lay it out. It's roughly 8.8 acres. If you just run the math at 16,000 square feet, that comes out to 22, I think it was. But obviously, you're gonna have to take some out of there in terms
Right.
of right away and so on and so forth. So, you know, that bumps it down to the 17, 18 unit mark. And keep in mind, each of those, again, like the last application, could be duplexes.
Should be twin homes.
Sure.
So if you have 12 lots, and there are 12 twin homes, you could have 24 residents
Sure.
easily put in there.
And here we're looking at 32.
Well, and, yeah, and keep in mind, you know, it's anywhere between 14 and 17 or 18
Right.
lots. So
Yeah, it could vary, obviously.
it could be
something like-
28 to 34. Yes.
That currently is zoned in R1C,
Correct.
okay, country.
R1C is country, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what pushes it to that larger square foot in terms of lot size of 16,000 square feet.
So this is another case that if we look at it, bumping it up, you gain 6 extra.
So not necessarily getting 2 more than we're requesting right now. You put 17 lots at 2 homes, you could have 34 homes in there. Or 34
Yeah,
units.
this is 32.
Right.
Right. The property location is basically this right here.
But there is one home on it, right?
That's on the, yeah.
Oh, there is one, okay.
There is one home right on the corner, yes, yep.
Oh, okay.
Do you guys own that too? Not that, no.
There's 2 homes on the corner, we own one of them. The one that's highlighted, we do not own.
Okay, the very, very corner.
This very corner one.
Okay. What's R2M?
The Mississippi River, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Residential
Okay,
class.
that's because of that close to the river.
So would that be a PUD then?
We'd be looking at a PUD for that, yeah, I believe, once it gets to the public hearing stage and we get out everything pulled together, it would be a PUD.
As far as the water service and putting all that in, that has nothing to do with the planning commission here. Right now, the discussion is
Correct.
how we're gonna look at this as far as, are we going to recommend at some point after a public hearing?
We would have to have the public hearing
Yeah.
first, to obviously gain input from the property owners along there, whether or not to develop this, but we wanted to bring it to the planning commission to get your discussion going on it before we do anything at the council.
No, say if it remained R1, they put up as many duplexes as possibly fit in there, they could still use them as rentals,
Correct.
so.
Yeah, there's nothing that the city can do in terms of dictating rental versus owner occupied. There is a permit that they have to apply for. But again, that's a permit, they have to make sure that they meet code, but that's just like any owner occupied. But it's up to the owner of that house whether or not they're going to rent it or be owner occupied.
No,
I'm sorry.
go ahead.
I assume that's a pond in the back there?
Potentially.
Okay.
I believe that's the intention. We haven't seen any drainage.
Yeah, that's
cuts
fine,
or anything like
preliminary,
that.
okay.
But yes, that would,
Okay.
from what I understand, that would be the intention, is to have a pond there. We know there has to be some stormwater ponding. Where it's gonna be, that's to be determined.
So Greg, just out of curiosity, you have tract A there, which is
Yep.
theirs, which abuts up to Riverwood.
Yep.
So could they just pull a main off from there, off from Riverwood, pull it in? And then 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, when somebody in DesRosier Drive wants to sell and their septic don't pass, and then we're putting
Then the city's putting in sewer water.
sewer and water down DesRosier Drive.
Yeah. Because the city does have an ordinance that if sewer water is within 500 feet, they have to hook up to it. Now, those that are farther down, and 500 feet, to give you perspective, is roughly halfway here.
Right.
This is approximately 1,000 feet. And that's about how far we can get sanitary sewer extended from Riverwood. We have a manhole here with, is stubbed out, and we can extend that approximately 1,000 feet before it basically runs out of ground to be able to serve properties north or south from there. And so that's why the project for the city was stopped at that location, because once we get to that point, it just isn't feasible to keep going with it, because it's not gonna be able to serve anybody at that depth. So if anybody's within that first 500 feet, at any point in time, if their septic system fails, they would have to hook up to sewer and water at that point in time.
Okay,
And Mississippi Boulevard on the other end has sewer and water.
Mississippi Boulevard has sewer and water on the other end. That would, if, once that is extended around, that would complete the loop to serve everybody on the road.
I take another 1,000 feet though,
They take another 1,000 feet, there's no doubt, yeah.
which eventually then it's gonna be developed someday.
At some point in time, it's likely to be developed, yes. When that is, somebody's crystal ball is better than mine.
So bottom line here is, one way or the other, they could end up with theoretically the same amount of units in R1C or R1.
That's-
Really,
That's what we're saying, there isn't a whole lot of difference in how many units.
Well, R1 would get you more units,
yeah,
but R1C or PUD would, from what they're asking, is about the same.
yeah, okay.
That's
Yeah,
that's probably a better way to put
Okay.
it.
Yeah, R1, you could have smaller lots, you theoretically could have more lots, okay, right.
You wanna hear anything from, it's just an open discussion here, you can speak up anytime you want.
I have a question, how you guarantee that? If you rezone that and it's open to the other densities that you have in your ordinance, how do you guarantee that?
The way that you guarantee that is with a PUD. With a PUD, you're basically saying, this is what's gonna be developed there. If you go to an R3, you're right, you can basically throw that out the window, and whatever is an R3 requirement, then that's what they could build. They could do high-rise, whatever, say 30 years down the road. But with a PUD, it's limited to what is in, what's approved in the PUD.
So what happens first?
In terms of,
Do you rezone it first and then you do the PUD
no,
or?
you do the PUD, what you wouldn't have to rezone it, you'd have a PUD overlay on the land there. And that would be a similar process to rezoning where you have a public hearing in it. But that would basically lay out this here that they've got 32 units, 8 fourplexes, or whatever they agreed upon. That would be what guarantees how many or how dense.
Okay, and then you approve that PUD, and what if there was area in there that you could fit something else in, like that area in front of the pond there?
Like up in here?
Yeah, what if could he come back and put something more in there?
He would have to come back to the planning commission, have to revise the PUD at that point in time, and then again, have the public hearing. But I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, the planning commission would look at what was approved the first time around to see what was agreed upon. I know we went through that actually with Gotwalls in terms of what their PUD called out, and it actually called out that these particular 2 lots that Mr. Gotwall wanted to split was called out and they're ready to be able to be split. So that's why that one went through, but if it wouldn't have, they likely would have been denied. So that, the PUD is what guarantees what would be allowed there in terms of 50 years down the road, 30 years down the road.
And if it stayed R1, is it a PUD too?
No, if it stays R1, they would have to plat it, but then whatever they decide to plat it as in terms, as long as it meets the current code, then they would be allowed to do that. And they wouldn't necessarily have to go through a public hearing for that. They'd have to go through a public hearing for the plat, but not necessarily for the layout of it.
And once you zone this, then R3, then you've created that same situation that you have on the other side. Now we have an R3 here. Oh, we want the next piece to the west. It should be R3 because we have R3 here, and it starts to expand. And then you have situations where, that becomes the argument, and it takes off. And You know, that's why you're gonna run into opposition from the residents up there, because that is the way this works.
I'll be honest with you, Mr. Bukowski, I will not recommend this to be an R3.
This, yeah, they're asking for R1 rather than R1C, correct?
They're asking for an R1 with a PUD.
With a PUD, okay.
Because, just like you said, once you put the R3 in there, then it can potentially spread. And as you know, with the lots out there, the way they are, an R3 wouldn't be conducive to that.
So they're not asking for a rezone to R3. They're not gonna ask for a rezone to an R3. They're asking for a PUD
PUD.
on an R1.
Yeah.
So there's no rezone involved in that?
The PUD would require the public hearing.
So it's just a public hearing, it's not a rezone?
It's
The
not,
rezone is from R1C to R1.
well,
That's what they're asking for.
well, they're asking for a PUD over
Over R1.
well, it'll probably over R1C.
Okay, that's what.
I guess it was never requested at the council meeting.
So what difference would it make if it's a PUD over an R1 or R1C? What is gonna be the big?
Well, the lot sizes, yeah. I mean, you start with the basic from the code, which would be the R1C, and then you go from there. So if you're starting with an R1, you're starting at that 11,000 square foot mark per lot, and going from there as opposed to the 16,000 square foot.
So how are you gonna put a fourplex on an R1 or R1C?
That's where the PUD comes into play, because it's the overlay district on it. With a PUD, it's a plan unit development. You look at the whole thing, the whole development as one,
Right.
because the intention of the code right now is that you have a building and the green space around it. So let's say it's 85% pervious surfacing around there. When you look at a PUD, you look at the entire area and say, okay, how does that make sense in terms of the pervious surfacing, so that you've got, like in this instance, you've got more green space on the one end and more over here to try to keep some of these apart. Whereas if you took this one and put it there, you'd still have, shifted them out, you still have the same amount of green space. So the PUD basically allows flexibility in terms of how everything lays out, so that you've got larger green spaces for everybody to use.
So what's the advantage of R1 over R1C if it's a planned unit development and you're looking for 8 units? Realistically, you could divide it into 8 lots, so why would we have to go to rezone to an R1?
We wouldn't have to rezone to R1. We wouldn't have to.
So it'd be an R1C PUD,
True. Yes.
because it's not an
The
R1.
PUD is gonna overlay regardless of what the zoning is.
Correct.
And it looks at the big, if I understand you correctly, it looks at the big picture
That's correct.
as opposed to maybe individual lots.
Correct. Yeah.
Mr. President, can I ask a question?
Yes, you may.
How is what they're wanting to do different than spot zoning? Could you explain that, please?
Spot zoning is basically, like you indicated, one in the area that doesn't match the rest of it. Because you've got such a large area, such a large development, you're able to look at it as a whole, as one big unit. I mean, we're looking at almost 9 acres here, 8.8 acres to be exact. That's what makes it the difference, is because you're looking at it as one big development, one planned area, so you can look to see how the impervious surfacing and pervious surfacing match on that entire thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but along the way, because I've attended all these meetings for almost 4 years now, I heard Jerry Locklear say a number of times that the original PUD, the big comprehensive plan, if I say it right that way, had to be re-looked at some point. And I don't know that that's ever been done.
The last
And-
time it was done, sorry.
And
2006.
so does this fit with the comp plan, what's being proposed here?
The comp plan shows this as R1C. It's very similar to that zoning map that we saw down there. When you look at it as an entire block, 8.8 acres, it does. But if you look at it individually, then, obviously it wouldn't. But you have to look at it, and that's the intent of the PUD, is to look at it as one large area as opposed to each individual one.
And how often can you make PUD changes? Because recently, in the last couple of years, you guys made PUD changes to multiple areas, including Belle Prairie, Linden Hills site, the school district. There was massive amounts, a couple dozen if I remember correctly. And
You're correct, and the reason on those is because they didn't originally have an underlying zoning district. It just had the PUD, and so what
Right.
they had to do was create that underlying zoning district, which in this case, it's still the R1C. The intent of a PUD is to actually have it as an overlay. So you have the R1C, which gives you the side yard setbacks, that type of stuff. Then you have the PUD on top of it, which looks at the entire area as one. Before, they didn't have that R1C, that underlying district on it before, and that was the difference. So they had to put that underlying district on all those PUDs that were there before.
so I guess what I'm asking is how many more of these smaller changes, these PUD changes that you're talking about, will happen, or how much more needs to happen before the comp plan is revised?
All of the PUDs currently have that underlying zoning district, and you usually update your comp plan, every, what, 10 years or so? 10 to 15 years? 10 years, every 10 years or so. And so we're looking at, it's going to be needed probably the next year or two.
When was that done last? Did you say?
2006.
Oh, 2000, okay.
And I think they had a 15-year view on theirs. But it's always good to review it again every 10 years just to make sure that it's consistent with what we're seeing. You can't project 10, 15 years in the future and expect to be right at 1% of the time. That's why you review it at that point in time to start looking again.
Thank you.
And the way I see this is, if it stayed like R1C without a PUD, they have the possibility to put in almost as many units, which is going to put the same amount of traffic coming down DesRosier. There isn't a whole lot of difference. What I see the PUD doing is it lays it out differently. You couldn't have such a layout if you had individual tracts of property.
Yeah, and again, we haven't seen kind of the layout of how that would work. We basically took 8.8 acres divided by the 16,000 and backed it out from there to get our rough numbers of how many units we can see up there. But arguably, it's probably going to be in that same neighborhood.
So I don't know, the house that's on track A is in pretty good shape right now, isn't it?
It's staying.
So you're not thinking about tearing that down and adding that to?
Nope.
Okay. And then the property just north of that, that's a pretty decent home too? Okay.
And keep in mind that the applicant doesn't own that one.
Yeah.
The corner.
But it's probably something that's not going to come up for sale in the near future.
It's nothing we're interested in.
You'd have to pay a lot of money for it. A lot.
There's not much we could do with it. We would never be interested in adding an additional building or something like that in the area.
So how it stands right now is it's R1C. If nothing happens, then they just need to follow the R1C regulations where they have 16,000-foot lots.
Sure.
So,
They would still have to do plat, which would come before the planning commission, but yes, that's correct.
but if the request is granted with the PUD, then it gives the city more flexibility on how it's laid out
How it's laid out.
and what can happen in the future.
Now, looking at this layout, what it tells me is if you go with the individual lots, everyone's going to be forced to drive out on DesRosier. But I see there's a road spurred out to the Riverwood there.
Yeah.
So if I live back there, and I'm more of the southern part, I'm going to go out to that road versus driving up to DesRosier, swinging over and coming back down. This plan might be a better way to keep the traffic down than doing it the other way, is what I'm saying.
Possibly. Again,
Yeah.
I haven't seen a layout to show exactly how that would go with the 16,000 square foot lots.
Yeah.
Frank,
Possibly.
So they're gonna have to have a road that runs back in there if they're gonna develop those 16,000 square foot lots.
You mean on that south side?
Yes, they're not gonna be able to use that property if they're just gonna access off of DesRosier. They're not gonna be able to use that backside. How could they do that?
I think what Frank is saying, that you may not have to have this connection here if the 16,000 square foot lots are put in. You know, you wouldn't necessarily have to have, you probably put that as green space or something for it, is what I would suspect, or a building here coming off of a horseshoe or something like that.
Well, they wouldn't have to have it on here either, would they?
They wouldn't have to know, but with a PUD, that gives a little bit more flexibility with the planning commission to be able to say, we want a road there.
What goes with that flexibility is the change in the future, that you give all that control as residents out there in this transition area between our lots that were developed when we were, long before we were in the city. And we have 30,000 square foot lots because we never expected we were gonna have to have sewer and water. That's why lots are 30,000 square feet instead of 16,000. And so you transition from that, when the annexation took place, you just changed everything that everybody who bought out there bought it for. And you're doing it, and there's, 2832, if they're duplexes, they fit into the type of construction closer to what's out there now than these quadplexes. And so we don't have loss of value because of that. The sewer and water, that issue becomes more of one that's cost. 50% of this is being assessed to the property owners. That's the highest assessment of any projects you have in the city. That's another issue that we have to deal with the council on. When we bought out there, 30,000 square foot. You bought it because you have a septic system, and if it fails, you can put another one in. Well, we can't do that now because you annexed us in. So now we have to pay 50% of the assessment to get sewer and water when we already bought a bigger lot so we could have an extra septic. And we have to hook up if we're 500 feet within the system. It's really a tough situation for everybody that is out there. And this is a transition between the old and the city, or the township and the city. And you guys have to consider all those issues that we have to deal with, every one of us. And these are young families too. It's not just retirees. It's from one spectrum to the other. And there's a lot of things that don't quite make sense here, but one of the things, if you come off of sewer and water off of off Riverwood, there are no assessments. It's 100% assessed to the developer. Yeah, that's a good situation. But if you come off DesRosier, if we would have maybe a decent assessment policy and a deferral that we could live with like everybody else got out there, we'd be looking at running the whole project all the way to Mississippi Boulevard.
I think there was a deferral.
We did.
I know that came in afterwards though, Frank. You look at when you as a city council approved the improvement hearing, that was not in there. And it never was said until the hearing that we held. So, all this stuff is changing. And it's very, very scary that it's always changing. That's why nobody trusts nothing.
The public hearing, we did indicate that the deferral was recommended, just like the rest
Greg,
of
the public hearing did, but when you got approval from the council to go to the public hearing, and you made the same presentation, it wasn't there.
True, and that was in the feasibility report. The feasibility report didn't have it in there.
So, and I did a data request for that information, and I'm looking through that, and it's not in there.
True.
So, then it all changes. What are we supposed to think when this is all happening so fast and changing like that?
I think when the council heard it, hearing that deferment made it look a little better.
It did.
But the high cost of putting it in doesn't matter about the deferral. We'd take it if it was a decent price. But the price is way up. It costs, what, more for the 5 of them?
Jeremy, Frank, you had approved your projects for the year. 3rd Street Northeast was one of them. Look at that street. 17% is the assessment on that. They need that street. That road is going to hell. And then you come and you look at DesRosier, where you got a good street and the residents have to pay 50%, or the assessments are 50% on a good road. It seems like it's backwards.
Because Third Street's already, that's reconstruction, they already paid once,
They
the
paid
first time
once.
that property was
We
done.
bought lots that were big enough for 2 septics, and if you had 2 septics, you'd have 40 years, and we'd have a long time to go too. And we paid for the road.
The problem is, anytime you annex, it's not for the advantage of the property owners. It's just one of those things that's the way the city grows.
I know, but when you set your policies, you have to consider that transition.
Yeah, but there's already been a 10-year transition.
There's nothing, nothing could happen, everything was supposed to stay the same. What was the assessment on Riverwood?
I don't know that answer.
Yeah,
I'm sure you know the answer.
I don't know the answer, but I know that people aren't as upset as they are on DesRosier because it isn't the same.
Could I ask a question?
Sure.
Why was not stubbing that in, whatever you have to do to get the piping in there off Riverwood? Who came up with this idea of involving the DesRosier Drive anyway?
Because that's where the houses are.
DesRosier Drive is stubbed into off from Riverwood.
Yeah, but you guys just said you could tap into on Riverwood, likely. So why wouldn't that have been considered before jumping these folks' taxes up and raising heck with a good road right now, if you could do that off of Riverwood?
Because
What?
that doesn't fix their problem, because if you stub it off of River Road, it only does this addition, it does not do DesRosier Drive.
And
Yeah, but DesRosier Drive people said, almost all of them said they didn't want it. I was here,
Until
filmed
they
it.
need it, then they'll want it.
But
But you
because
gotta
we're
re-
being assessed at 50% and everybody else is at 17%.
But the way of the future is no septic systems. Look
Right.
at what's happening out, even out, if you go to Iowa, or if you go south of here, even in the rural areas, it's city water and sewer. That's the wave of the future. The wave of the future is no septic systems. Now, it's gonna take a long time to get there, but in an ideal world, there would be no more septic systems, because they are not the best way to handle sewage. The best way to handle sewage is through a sewage treatment plant.
And to stub in, like you say, off Riverwood, if you went to single lots going through there, you're not gonna stub in all the way and go across every lot to get to the other end. You would have to go down like DesRosier Drive or something. You couldn't do it. What we're saying, like you were saying, why don't we just stub in off from there? If this plan goes through to build it this way, that's an option, to stub in off from there, because then they can supply all of this coming in from there because they own the whole property. But you can't do that on individual lots.
How about if they donated a small part of that, so they could get that a city road, so you guys would have to plow that and then get the stuff in there,
On the south side,
somewhere in there. I mean, that's what happened with DesRosier Drive. That was a private road given over to the city. And now, right after that, now this whole mess occurs.
The only way that we would take it is if there was property on both sides of the road. Because when you go to reconstruct it at some point in the future, it's not palatable to assess just one side of the road. That's why you don't see a lot of frontage roads, because you don't have benefiting property on both sides.
So couldn't this be laid out so that, maybe a little differently, so that those homes would be on both sides of a road and you go in there with a T and then run it this way instead or something?
Well, with DesRosier Drive being already installed up there, you don't want another one that close. I mean, the blocks are usually about 400 feet apart. I don't know what this is here. Looks like 270, 280. So, and then you've got Elm Street right down here. You wouldn't be able to assess these parcels because they're not benefiting anything from it. The only benefit would be on the north side. And then if DesRosier ever needed sewer water, you'd have to do it again there. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense financially from that perspective to put the pipes and everything on the south side.
I'm gonna make a suggestion that this group and you guys get together with everybody who's concerned about this from out there and do a brainstorming session. Because somebody probably will have a good alternative so that everyone is at least happier than what they are now.
that's what we're doing now.
Right, but they're not all here. Lord, there's only,
They're all invited, and if there's a
yeah, but they
public
didn't know
hearing,
this was gonna be a brainstorming. I mean, that's different.
if there's a
They're-
public hearing, it's all, they're gonna come, trust me.
Right, but that's-
Anybody that has any interest in this whole project, and we're gonna hear about it,
But that's only 2 minutes that they get to talk. It's not an open brainstorming session. I mean, couldn't that be done? So there were a lot of people here. This whole council was people from DesRosier, and most of them spoke. They deserve to, they didn't know that this was gonna be a brainstorming thing tonight. How would they have
well,
known
this
that?
is- It's not really like we're brainstorming, this is a night where we're getting informed of what's
Right,
really.
right.
See, Jeremy and I have heard a lot of this already, more than what they're hearing right now. This is, so these three people, and then the other ones, when they show up again, they at least know what's going on.
Right,
And we're not discussing, like the city council, what the discussion was there, was if we're gonna allow to put in water and sewer going down that line. This group is only gonna come up with a recommendation of what do we see as a better fit for that area, a plan like this versus single-family dwelling, you know? So that's our only concern. We can't say where the water stubs in or anything like that.
Right.
That's none of our affair. Or if there's gonna be a road on the south or anything. That's gonna be up to what the city council feels is the best at that meeting. And, you know, Steve, just to, here, go ahead, you speak, then I'll talk to Steve.
Hey, can I, thanks for letting me talk here, too.
Okay.
But for information item, this city engineer and Greg and I had good discussions on this so far and so on. But we haven't talked about costs. And the thing that really comes down for me on this is that it's going to cost me $26,000. You know, it's just.
That's a lot of money.
I mean, I'm retired, and and the same thing goes for Johnson's. You know, Bert Johnson and Betty. So, and the others, you know, it's a single lot. It's going to cost $12,600, and we happen to have an extra one that we were doing gardening on and so on. You know. But it's all with surprise here. If the price were down a bit so that it wasn't so stinging, and there's no way we can sell a lot for, you know, say, okay, the lot's only worth $20,000, and then you take then say it's $12,600 off from that, and I lose $12,600 on because I paid $22,000, including the road. We paid for the road going in, paving of it and everything. I mean, individuals.
One thing to keep in mind on that assessment, you only pay it on the taxes once you hook up. So on that second lot, if you decide not to ever hook up or never build on that, it's deferred until you eventually hook up.
Yeah, but I'm getting older now, and if I sell and I have to, I have to get closer to the kids or something like that, then that's due. No, right? I mean, it's not deferred. I can't sell it and say, well, oh, this is deferred for you too.
It would be deferred until such time as you build a home on there.
True.
No, but I mean, what about my house at $12,600?
If he sells, he has to pay the assessment.
Yeah, that's.
Hooked up to sewer water.
Yeah, not until he hooks up to
But-
sewer water.
But even the house itself, you know, it's assessed at $203,000. And so we take off, you say, well, before you sell this thing, you got to pay $12,600.
If you hook up to the sewer and water, if you don't hook up to sewer and water, you don't have to pay it.
You have to hook up when you sell.
When I sell,
And that's
that's
septic or septic and well passes
I
it.
thought that-
that's back.
Oh, okay. I didn't know.
If it don't pass inspection.
Oh, yeah,
then it would
okay, it has to be
So if the
inspected.
sewer is inspected and it don't pass, then they'd have to hook up the sewer.
And that's negotiated a lot of times between buyer and seller,
Okay.
but it's
Well-
not required of the city.
But negotiated, it's still due though, isn't it?
Not
Not
unless
only
you're,
hook up.
septic doesn't
Unless you
pass.
hook up. Oh, this is the first time I've heard that.
The
That's
seller,
what the whole deferral.
the buyer will assume the assessment, and if they decide to hook up, then they will pay it when they choose to.
Yeah.
And no one can make you hook up till you need it. You don't gotta pay anything until you need it.
But how come it's 50% instead of 17?
That would help.
The individuals on Third Street, Fifth Street, projects we've already ordered in, already have sewer water in place already. And so they
Okay.
have a different rate for a reconstruct as opposed to a new. This would be new pipe going into the ground for that, and they have different rates for
And that fee is double and a half what an existing one
It's
is, huh?
twice, it's not double and a half, it's twice. The average assessments on Third, if I remember correctly, are about $9,000.
And Steve, there's property in Little Falls, people have lived here for a long time. On the west side, there's dirt roads there that have never been paved because of the same issue you're talking about right now. They would have to pay first-time fees to get that road, sewer and water and everything through there, and the cost is a lot higher. They petitioned for one on the west side last year, a group of people. Then when they found out the cost, they didn't petition again. They didn't want it because it cost them too much. So instead of going around this time and the same guy tried to get everybody involved, let's petition, let's get this road in here finally. And they found out just how much it's gonna cost. He couldn't get another neighbor to sign, and they all wanna stay with what they have. They don't wanna hook up or have a new road put in there with all the amenities that go with it. So it's the same thing with people who have been in this town for a long time. And at one point, whoever lives along that stretch has to pay for it. Otherwise, the town is throwing in money, everybody from everywhere. So that's how it's always worked, to get the streets in we have right now.
Are the Roaches paying as much proportionally as the DesRosier residents are?
The Roaches are gonna pay
Per foot.
per foot, same thing.
They're paying
And how they
63,000?
recoup, so they don't lose a lot of money, is they have to raise the rents or whatever, where they can at least make a profit. But they have to recoup it somehow too, because it's gonna be quite expensive for the Roaches to put this development in there like this, because they're assessed that whole stretch, 50% of it.
Well, they put 30 units in there, then they have $60,000 in assessment, so each unit would pay $2,000 towards the extension of
Yeah.
down to DesRosier, compared to my
Almost
good neighbors
30,000.
paying
Yeah,
$26,000.
it isn't proportionate then.
And it's not proportionate either when we're paying 70, if you count the homes, or those of us in that stretch, it's about 72,000 we're paying. To count the 72 versus
What is the breakdown
63.
on that, as far as Roaches versus?
I don't have the numbers in front of me, but we're assessing about $142,000 of the total project cost, and if you're paying 72, then he's paying 70.
Oh, they got the one on the corner, on the front side, it's
True.
gonna pay up the first portion of it on that side.
And those are side lots on that particular one, so it's not gonna be as much, but there is a portion.
And they don't have a water and sewer sub, because they get their water and sewer off of Riverwood.
Yeah, the two lots are siding, so they only pay for the road, which we paid for because we had to get out to Riverwood. We paid for the road when we bought our lots. And so now it's getting torn up, we have to pay for it again. I don't, because it doesn't come as far as me, but the rest of the folks do, and it will, because this will set the precedent. So, and it isn't anywhere near needing to be replaced.
I think that's a consideration the council is thinking about too. They don't like to see the destruction of a perfectly good road. And we have other roads in town we have to repair, so that part of it isn't setting too well.
Another question
So-
comes, if you develop, because you're only going up to a certain point with this part, when does the other part get taken care of?
Whenever, and that has to come in from the other way.
That's coming from Mississippi.
Right, but you made a comment the other night that you have to widen that road by 2 feet. So how do you widen just part of a road by 2 feet? What happens with the other part?
You tie back in, you transition back in, there's a taper.
Lindbergh Drive does the exact same thing. Lindbergh
And
Drive
what
is wide
side?
up until Lindbergh State Park. It narrows back down, and then it widens up on the other side of it.
So are you going a foot on each side, or are you going 2 feet on one side?
1 foot on each side.
So then that's all of our culverts and our driveways. I mean, it's more than just the road at that point.
Well, we do match it pretty close actually with the existing stuff out there. We will obviously have to widen the foot, but we do match it fairly close to the rest of the stuff. So we do have to transition, there's no doubt, but I'm not anticipating having to rip up a lot of those culverts in the driveways.
Why when the 2003 project went in, did they pave everything back to what existed?
Why did they put back 22?
They put back between, some of it's only 16.
I don't know.
Some of it's 16. There were no 24-foot wide pavements that went in, other than Riverwood, which was paid for by the county, that went in as a part of the 2003 Riverwood improvement.
Yeah, I don't know why they went back with the narrow road. I can't say why.
Because I think Peggy's right. You know, what will happen is you come in there and you're going to widen that out, and then on the driveways, it's all going to be steep and harder to maintain. We haven't even seen the plans. I was going to ask you on the plans on that center line culvert by Gordon's, it has it on your preliminary and the feasibility study that it's being salvaged, but it doesn't have it reinstalled. Is it going to be reinstalled?
It'll be reinstalled, yes.
What's the chances that the Roaches might consider paying a little higher to appease their concerns about the higher? I mean, because they have a good point. You guys are going to be making money off this project. They're not. And it is disproportionate. And so maybe that might be...
Disproportionate how?
Well, because like
We're all
this...
paying per foot that...
Yeah, but it's different because you've got 32 potential
no
little
difference.
There's
homes.
no difference. If you own 32 feet, you pay for 32 feet. It's all the same.
The city's
What you
policy-
do with your property is your business, but
The city's policy is pretty wide, and so in that respect, that's how the assessment roll was pulled together. It was based on the policy and the rate schedule that the city has, and that's how the numbers were derived.
Someday DesRosier's gonna have to pay an assessment coming off, I mean, they'll have to pay it, Roaches will have to pay an assessment if they do any work along Riverwood too, but they just won't pay 50% at that time because that's already been existing and somebody has prepaid for that a while back. So there's a chance they're gonna have to pay some more money down here in a short time. Any repairs along that, so, I mean, it all comes out the same in the long run. Eventually, it's just like the people on the west side, there's dirt roads all over there that someday we're gonna have to deal with, and they're gonna have to pay a lot of money to get that done. All the other roads on the west side, somebody paid a lot of money to get it done the first time it went through. And,
luckily that was 30 years ago or 50 years ago or whatever.
No, some just happened just recently
Yeah.
because it just extended, I know, because I'm also paying for the, and it is unfortunate, but like you said.
you're paying
that's
that high,
developing.
a high
Yeah.
assessment.
It's 12,600 on my lot. That's 80 feet. I mean, that corner lot, so,
You
And I
got
know
hit
we
from
have
two
three
sides. Okay.
so assessments are assessments. Everybody, we got an assessment roll that we follow, so it's fair to,
And I do
They're
feel
all-
for you people, I feel badly, but it is,
But wasn't the assessment just recently changed? The assessment policy just recently changed?
The assessment policy was recently changed. Originally, it said a third, a third, a third, but we weren't meeting that a third, a third, a third portion. And so we changed it so it's 25%, 25%, 50% being the city. So we actually brought it back closer to what we were seeing as opposed to a third, a third, a third.
I actually came in favor of the homeowners. I didn't think about it, I paid some good assessments too.
I just remember Bev Newis standing at the podium being in favor of something, but she was about to lose her lot because the assessments were going to kill her. She couldn't afford to keep the lot. when that road improvement went in over on First Street Northwest. And it's a shame to do that to people who've been here. Her, in her case, a lifelong resident.
I will say, she still owns the lot.
And if she didn't pay it, nobody came out more out of your pocket, because the city has to pay for it.
Somebody
That's
has to
you.
pay for it,
Somebody
that's-
has to pay for it, so your taxes would have had to go up. And we don't like seeing that either. You know, we feel as taxpayers in this town, especially if nothing's being done in front of our house, everything else is getting built all around us, and we have to pay more taxes to make sure their streets look better, and ours is falling apart. But it all comes in time. Someday they'll fix up our streets. It's a tough adjustment coming from where you were annexed in. I can understand that. I don't think